Okay, Mommy, I'm gonna turn yours on.
Okay. Whoa, it's gonna slide.
No, it's good. They can all hear you. And then I have to turn mine on. Bueno. Yeah. Okay, I don't know. Raise your hand if I have either been your teacher or your substitute teacher. Okay, thank you. Mostly substitute teacher. Yeah, so I'm Senora Vadke, and that's what I like to be called when I'm in school. You know, that's my preferred name. Senora Vadke because I'm a relatively recently retired Spanish and French teacher, but Spanish teacher from here in Waukee. And this is my mama, and so we like to call her Senora Chung because she is a much less recently retired Spanish and sometimes French and English teacher. And I think you know that La Senora Chung is from Guam, and she lived through the occupation of Guam. And I think that actually it doesn't really matter what age you are. Right now, at this point in time, it's pretty rare to be able to sit with someone who can give you a first-hand account of World War II in the Pacific. In Europe, you can find more people, right? And they're generally going to be soldiers, and they'll be pretty old. My mom's 84, but she lived through the occupation on Guam, and I think it's a story that it's important for people to hear. So my mama used to come to my classes at Prairie View. She would come to, well, she came to all my classes because she also speaks Spanish. But in my Spanish 2 classes, we would ask her questions in the past tense, the past tenses. So those of you that took up through Spanish 4, right? She would, in the imperfect, we would talk about what her life was like on Guam when she lived there. And then in the preterite, we would ask about things, those of you that don't know Spanish, it's one-time actions in the past. So students would ask about things that happened during the war. And so she's answered those questions lots of times, but this is kind of going to be her first time really getting a chance to do that in English. So that's great. I will tell you that Mom might start and tell you a little bit herself, but mostly what she has to share with you will come from your questions. So I hope that as you listen, I think it would be hard not to. I think you'll engage with what she's saying, and that should engender questions in you, right? She tells you about something, and you're going to be like, what? Did that really happen? I have questions. That's what we want to hear, are those questions. Okay? All right, so Senora Chung, Senora Vadke, her name is B, but out of respect, of course, we're going to call her Senora Chung. So, Mommy, why don't you start by just telling us a little something, and then that should already engender a few questions.
Oh, that's what you say. Half a day.
Oh,
Half a day.
half a day. That's the greeting, so you should greet her back. Half a day.
Half a day.
Half a day.
Sí.
Huh?
Así se dice.
Oh, but we're speaking English,
Oh,
except
English.
a little bit of
Sorry.
Chamorro.
Sorry. We say half a day on Guam. In Hawaii, you say what? Anybody?
Aloha.
Aloha. Aloha. Okay, so it's half a day. I'm from Guam, and I've lived in the United States longer than I have on Guam. I have a family of 5 and grandchildren and great-grandchildren even. So I'm in Iowa. I'm pretty much an Iowan.
But she doesn't like the cold.
But I happen to have grown up on Guam, and I was little, but I was there during the war. What war are we talking about? Okay, World War II, yes. I was on Guam, and it actually was a really traumatic experience for me when the war started, because Guam is virtually Catholic. It's mostly Catholic. Any reason why? Do you have any idea why it's, no? You've heard about the Spanish-American War, right? Okay, well, Guam was owned by Spain. Guam was owned by Spain more than 500 years. And so the influence of the Spanish language and culture is found on the island. And, oh, I lost my thought.
That's gonna happen.
It's
okay. So you were saying
84.
Catholic, because you were
Oh,
gonna
yes,
tell
yes,
about
yes,
the
yes.
day
Yes,
of
yes.
the bombing.
Yes, the day of the bombing, when the first bomb was dropped on the island of Guam, it's pretty much the same time that it happened in Hawaii, because the international dateline is between Hawaii and Guam. So when it's
Well, let's see if they know. What was the date that Pearl Harbor was bombed? December 7th?
mhm.
What day was Guam bombed?
It was December 8th on Guam, because Guam already started the new day.
Guam's little phrase is Guam, where America's day begins, because they're on the other side of the date line. So like on Facebook, I know, you don't do Facebook because you're young, but you know what it is, right? On Facebook, when people wish me happy birthday, my relatives on Guam wish me happy birthday a day early. And then friends here are like, I'm so sorry, I'm a day late. I'm like, no, my relatives on Guam are a day early, okay? So it was the same day, but on Guam, it's December 8th.
Okay. Well, it was a Saint's Day, and I happened to be one of the little angels in church, and I was dressed up as an angel, and we were in church when we heard that a bomb had been dropped on the southern part of the island. And so my aunt, who had taken me to church, rushed me out of there, and she just pulled my, what do you call it?
Wings.
My wings off of me. She didn't even try to get it off. She just tore it apart, because she was rushing to get me ready so that we could go away from the Capitol, so that we would be away from the bombing. So that was very traumatic. It happens to be one of the only things that I remember about the beginning of the war, although my father was in for Guam it's called the Insular Guard. My father was in the Insular Guard, which is military, and he was one of the few people who ¿cómo se dice?
Survived?
No, survived, no.
Defended?
Sí. One of the people who defended the capital again, yeah, and yeah. So my father stayed to defend the capital, while the rest of us went to my grandfather's ranch away from the capital. We lived in a barricada for ranching purposes.
You need water.
Okay, yeah, por favor.
Are you ready for a question, or do you want to tell them anything else first?
Yeah.
Question?
Yes, that'll be fine.
Okay.
Any?
All right, so how about a question or two? Okay, here's one. Oh, first tell me your name. McKenna. Thank Thanks.
How far away did the rest of your family live from you?
How far away did the rest of the family live from you?
Oh, we lived pretty much together. The custom on Guam is when, especially way back then, when a woman gets married, she joins her husband's family. So my mother went and lived with my father's family, and so I and my two brothers, who were also born by then, we grew up in the same home as our grandparents. But my grandfather and the men in the household would go to the country to farm. They went every day to farm, and yeah, so all of them, had that experience.
See,
How old were you when you lived in Guam?
¿Cómo?
how old were you when you lived on Guam?
How old was I?
Mhm.
I was 17.
Mm.
Yeah, I just finished high school.
She was 17 when she left Guam. She was born on Guam and lived there until she went to college. How old were you when the war started on Guam?
I actually was 3 years old when the war started. I was just turned 7 when the war ended. Yeah, it might be interesting for you to know that the Japanese, oh excuse me, the Japanese took census. We get census to count people and see everybody and so forth. Well, my parents, my mother and father, both were teachers before the war. And teachers in that time meant American teachers. They teach in American schools. That's all there was. And so they tried to teach us, the 3 of us were born, to teach us English, and they did not teach us our language until later. And the reason they taught us English is because they figured the United States was going to be very, what's the term? Very prevalent in the life of Chamorros on the island. And so they wanted us to know how to speak English. And so when the Japanese came and they start taking census, we were not counted. My cousins were all counted, and most of the people, I imagine there are other people who, like us, were not counted or were hidden from the Japanese. But I don't know that. I was 3 years old, and so I have no idea. But in our home, my father dug, I don't suppose.
Like a crawl space?
A what?
Like a crawl space?
Yeah, under the house to have us go there when the Japanese are coming to do the census, to take a census on the island. So the people in the village knew who we were and who our parents were, and they knew that we couldn't speak Chamorro. So they helped us to hide when the census is starting somewhere, that a runner would be sent to come to our house and let us know the census was starting. So we had to hide under the house until the census is over. And sometimes it took a whole day.
Mommy, what would have been the consequences of the Japanese finding you and you speaking English?
Oh, it would have been very dire consequences. I imagine because we were little, I was 3, one of my brothers was 2, and the other one was 4. We were that small. It probably would have been our parents that were punished because we were speaking English. In fact, one of my cousins, 2 of my cousins, one of my mother's sisters had 2 children who were imprisoned because they were speaking English. They were older. They were 17 and 18, and they were what do you call it?
They were playing a
What?
game, weren't they?
They were playing a game. What do you call it? A dog fight? The planes fighting? Yeah, they were playing with that, showing the Americans, of course, winning, and they were caught by the Japanese because the Japanese, their pretty officers had their home downstairs, and my family, my cousins and their family lived upstairs. They had a 2-story home, and so the Japanese came upstairs and heard them singing and playing with planes and so forth. One of the things is that the people of Guam really were part. They considered themselves part of the American world because the military, right after the war, actually before the war, the military was on Guam. They had to pull out to safeguard themselves when the Japanese were coming because Guam. Anybody have any idea what Guam was like, size-wise or anything? You know? Yeah.
It's really tiny, it's like 2 miles wide or something.
Close. She said it's like 2 miles wide.
Oh, that's the width. That's the width.
Yeah. But at its widest point, though, it's
Actually, the widest point is
8 miles wide.
8 miles. It's the northern part, and the southern part is wider, and then through the middle is narrower. Yes. So it's a very, very
How long is
small
it?
island.
How long is it?
It's 30 miles long. So you think about it. Actually, Metro Des Moines is far greater than the island of Guam. It's really small.
But it's also very strategic. It's very strategically located.
Yeah.
And you might hear about Guam in the news whenever there's the possibility, like.
Oh yeah, the Koreans
Yeah.
might.
They're going to bomb the U.S. Where are they going to bomb? Well, they're going to bomb Guam. And Guam is an important military base, and it has been particularly important since World War II. But because of its location,
Right.
It's very important for the U.S. and as a place that someone might attack.
Mhm. Yeah, it's really, really small.
But you weren't, on Guam, you weren't American citizens yet?
No.
During
oh,
World
no,
War II?
No, we were not. We didn't become Americans until 1950, when the Organic Act of Guam was passed by the Congress. of the U.S. Before that, we had, what do you call it? We had military governors all the time before that. But in 1950, we became, we didn't become independent, but we were able to what do you call it? Govern ourselves, at least by having a unicameral, what do you call it?
System?
System, yeah. That means just, one house. Any other questions? Yeah?
McKenna?
Was it normal for Japanese people to live with people from Guam?
Mm. Yeah, so she asked if it was normal for Japanese people to live with the Chamorros, but I think it's the way that you phrased it. So when you said your auntie and her family lived upstairs, how is it that the Japanese came to live downstairs?
Oh, well, my family, my mother's sister had this home, and it happened to be one of the better homes in the area. And so the Japanese just simply took over, and they decided to live downstairs and have the family, my family, upstairs. It's the Japanese. First, I have to preface things and say, people aren't really necessarily terrible. It's the governing people, the governments that decide whether wars take place, right? So it's not the Japanese people that came to Guam and were terrible. The ones that came to Guam were terrible, but they were the military of Japan. I'd like you to get that in your mind, because the question about the Japanese living with Chamorros is a good question. My godparents were Japanese and Chamorro. He was Japanese and my godmother was Chamorro. And so before the war, they lived together. We lived with each other, and there was no problem. But it's a different world. It's a different invasion, let's say. It's the military that comes to the island, and yeah. And they just took over the place, my aunt's place.
I want to make a comment really quickly there. So my mom, I said, used to come to my Spanish classes, right? And my Spanish 2 students would ask questions. And one year, I remember very clearly one of my students asked my mom, do you hate the Japanese? That's
No.
what she asked my mom. And what's your answer?
No, I do not hate the Japanese. I hate the Japanese military that governed the island of Guam during the war. They were terrible. When anyone was being punished, if you happen to be downtown when somebody's being punished, you better find yourself someplace else. Because if you stay there, the Japanese round up everybody and they stand in line and they wait to see the punishment carried out. And if you were in the line and you cried out or you protested, you'd be the next one to get the punishment. So they were really, they were harsh. Has any of you seen the movie Back to Bacan? Back to Bacan.
That is gonna be a no. The adults in the room haven't seen that movie.
The movie Back to Baton is about the Philippines and the death march in the Philippines. I mean, they did that on Guam too. Is that they just move people from one place to another, just, you know, the little children die and the old people die, and they move them around and so forth, and they get them and put them in concentration camps. You never heard of concentration camps about Japan, did you? You did? Yeah, because there were two. There were concentration camps on Guam. There are not quite as many. First of all, the island's tiny. Tiny. Right now, there are about 170,000 people on the island. What's the population of Des Moines? Frankly, I don't know either, but I know that it's a lot more than that.
I
Yeah.
think Mrs. Lansing had a question.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh, no, you're okay. I wondered, when you said that when the bombing happened, your aunt moved you to the country, to your grandfather's place. Once you knew it was safe, did you move back home, or did you stay in the country?
No,
what
we
was it
didn't.
like then?
We didn't move back until the end of the war. Mm-hmm.
So what was life like then, living on the farm? How was that different than before?
Well, it was always customary for families to have farms or ranches away from the city, and well, city, it's villages, and so people have accommodations. They're not very fancy, you know. They're grass huts and so forth. They're thatched roof huts, and they don't have running water and so forth, but they will suffice for people to survive, and people did. I had
An idea?
yeah, but
I have an idea too, but let me have you have a drink of water first. And then I'll tell you my
I
idea.
know my
No, I know, it's okay.
It's so bad.
You're doing really well. By the way, my mom had a stroke about a year and a half ago, and so her speech and things are it's a little more labored than it would have been if she had spoken to you a year and three-quarters of a year ago, but you're doing amazingly well.
Thank
You are, incredible. The thing that I was thinking about was coconut.
Oh.
Could you tell us about coconut and explain that?
All right.
Whether you like coconut or not? Because I know a lot of people don't.
Yeah, that's right. A lot of people don't like coconut. By the way, the people of Guam are called Chamorros. Chamorro. We call ourselves Chamorros. When the U.S. came to Guam, they called us Guamanians, and they still use that term. But a lot of the people on the island are now calling themselves Chamorro. I was going to say my license plate just Chamorro, but I don't have it anymore. Anyway,
Coconut.
Oh, yes, I'm sorry. Coconut. The coconut plant saved the island of Guam. It saved the people of the island of Guam. The coconut plant is so useful. I mean, the coconut plant can be used from the little tiny, tiny plant to obviously the tree that you see that drops the big old coconuts, right? Um, when the when the people, when the Japanese came, the people had been living an American life, kind of, nothing fancy like it is here, but yeah. And there were stores on the island, and there were, you know, there were different things. When the Japanese came, they confiscated virtually everything, and they took over about everything. One of the things is that before the Second World War, much before that, I guess, the island of Guam was sort of self-sufficient because rice was grown on the island, and the coconut grew on the island, naturally grew on the island. And those are two of the items that constitute our food.
They're the staples.
Yes. Yeah.
To jump back to what you were talking about, do you remember like going into the city or like how your everyday life kind of changed after the Japanese invaded?
Do you remember how your everyday life changed after the Japanese invaded? Like you used to go into the village to go to the store, but then after the Japanese invaded, after the occupation? Or during the occupation?
Right. Before, as I said, there were stores, and there were Americans that owned stores. They had to leave the island when the U.S. knew that Japan was going to invade the U.S., because that was the first thing. If they invade Guam, it's through Guam first, and so forth. So the Americans left, but there were stores and all that. People, you know how when a tornado or something is coming and people stock up things, right? On Guam, they stocked up things, but then the Japanese took them. So there wasn't anything. That's why I say the coconut plant made the island of Guam survive, because they could eat every part of the coconut. They can't eat, They can't eat every part of it, but there's
Every stage.
right.
From the youngest part of the coconut, like you pull out the green part, right? And
Right,
you can suck on that. Also the meat, you guys only have it when it's, fully grown, but when you have it and it's younger, it's very tender, and you use that to make drinks. My favorite is when the coconut has been sitting there and it's about to become a tree. My grandfather would chop into that, and inside there's this thing we call faja, and I describe it like, you're not even gonna get this reference, but a ball, like a ball of rubber bands. You've seen those like in an ad, right? Kind of like a ball of rubber bands, but more almost like, that's the way I describe it to kids. But between the consistency of cotton candy, but a little heavier. This is a little more dense, and it's
Right,
sweet.
and
So
it's
it's like a
sweet.
dessert. So a little kid just wants that part of the coconut. So the Japanese maybe didn't, I don't know if they didn't know, but they didn't use all of that. And so the coconut in all of its stages was there and was really your main source of food during the
Right,
occupation.
Right.
So that's how it's saved. So I have a lot of friends who say they don't love coconut, Raise your hand if you don't like coconut. No, you may, really, there are a lot of people don't like coconut, right?
Okay.
And I say, well, that's okay, but I'll just tell you that coconut saved my mom's life, right? Like, coconut saved the island of Guam.
And you don't know all coconut, so anyway, yeah.
Okay, other questions? Yeah.
Did the thought of leaving Guam ever come across your family's mind, or were you kind of set there?
Did your family ever consider leaving the island during the occupation?
No. First of all, they wouldn't have been able to leave. The people who married Americans, they were, what do you call it? They,
Extricated? That's probably not the one you want, but
right. They
evacuated. That's what you
evacuated,
want,
right.
evacuated.
Their families were evacuated, but unless you had an in with the American military, you really didn't leave the island. It's a tiny island.
Talk about Tata. Tata means father in Chamorro, so my grandfather is Tata.
Yeah.
Talk about Tata and his role, and what happened to him.
My father, as I said, stayed in the capital to defend the capital, and it's because he was part of the Insular Guard, which is, I suppose, like what's the
National Guard?
kind of like the National Guard here. Yeah, so he stayed and defended. The Americans who had been there as troops in on the island before the Japanese invaded, they were evacuated so that they wouldn't be killed. It's a tiny place. There's no place to go. There's no place to go. So they would be in trouble. There's actually one American military gentleman named, I forgot his first name. His last name was Tweed, T-W-E-E-T.
I can't remember.
Mr. Tweed. He did not leave when the Americans,
It's just the microphone.
when the Americans left. He stayed on the island. So that meant that he was in trouble with the Japanese. Well, the Chamorro people took Mr. Tweed and made sure that he was moved from place to place to place, people's home, so that he did not get captured by the Japanese. And they say that he used some contraption he made up to signal the
Yeah, he communicated with the
the
military. Because he
yeah.
was the only,
He was-
he was the only one on island, and so he communicated with the US military and eventually helped them to retake
Right.
Guam, or, yeah. There was something else, so about Tata being a prisoner of war.
Oh, yeah. So my father was a prisoner of war. He had some health issues, so he was allowed to stay at home. What do you call it when he's confined to quarters or whatever you call it?
Oh,
Yeah, he stayed home, but he was a prisoner. Yeah.
One other thing about my grandfather,
Mhm.
Tata, many years later, I remember it. I don't know if I was in high school, junior high, but he came stateside, because Guam is a part of the United States now, right? So Guam is the United States, but he came stateside, and he went to Washington DC, and he spoke before Congress. And I recently looked up I
The
found, and I
records.
have all of the testimony of the Chamorros who came, and they were speaking to Congress to get, shoot, the word just flew out of my head.
Okay,
What is it called?
I can't come up with
Can't
it
think
right.
of the word.
But they say, okay, the people of Guam suffered a lot under the Japanese, and they suffered a lot,
Reparations.
yeah.
I was close with an R word, but I knew it wasn't the right one. Reparations.
Reparations.
Thank you.
Because,
I had a stroke.
what do you call it?
What?
Oh, gosh.
The people of Guam suffered a lot, and
Yeah. Oh, and so after the Second World War, I don't know if you had any idea that the U.S. Treated Japan pretty well. That they gave money, they helped them to rebuild their stuff, and the people of Guam who were killed, a lot of people were killed the entire time. And people in Guam say, you know, we suffered for the U.S. and we get nothing. We have our people die and our children die, our parents die during the war, and nothing happens to us. But Japan is getting help from the U.S., and that didn't seem fair to the people of Guam. So they tried to get reparations, and actually they have finally $10,000 for each surviving Chamorro. Mm-hmm.
Do you remember how your life changed after the war? Like after Japan left Guam?
She doesn't. She needs to talk as loud as I do. She keeps trying to tell me I need to talk loud.
you do, but it's okay.
I love your voice, by the way. Yeah, go ahead.
How life on Guam changed then after the war was over. Although, hang on one moment, it's a really good question, and think about the soldiers in the movie. But did you have a question about during the occupation still?
No.
No.
It's unrelated.
Unrelated. Anyone else have a question about during the occupation itself? Okay, then what happened after the occupation, after Guam was freed? How did life change? Tell it.
Okay.
Mom has some stories about some things that she remembers very clearly. I remember she was 7 when the war ended.
Yes, when the war ended. First of all, the first Christmas, the Red Cross brought tons of toys for little kids, you know, and just brought them into the island and distributed them out to little kids. Some of them, of course, were toothbrushes and toothpaste and whatnot, but we all appreciated because we had nothing. After the war, we had nothing. Those of us who had parents who were far looking and they hid food and stuff like that, they all ran out. Those that the Japanese did not take, they ran out. So we had nothing, and so the first Christmas was wonderful all over the island. And it continued, actually. The American Red Cross was absolutely wonderful. And it's not just that they also helped with health, with people helping people to get some health. It's-
Explícales de eso de la película
Mm.
y la muñeca.
La muñeca.
Sí, tenías un cuento sobre una muñeca que un soldado te dio, no sé.
Oh.
Explícales eso de la película. ¿Recuerdas?
Okay. Well, I started to say that there's a movie that is supposed to be a bugwam, but it was filmed in the Philippines, and what was it called? No Madness an Island. That is the movie. The other
Is that the one about Tweed? Or no?
No.
No, there's a movie about Tweed too. I
Yeah.
don't remember what it's called.
Oh my gosh.
It's okay, they can Google it. about
Yeah.
That's where your microphone is, Mommy. You should have put it on the other side.
Okay. We were able to see free movies. My home was surrounded by military, American military after the war. There was Navy, there was Army and so forth. And so the bases have free movies for the men, and they invited us to come whenever we wanted, and we did. And once we went and we watched, we had not realized that we were going to see something that was really close to our hearts. Excuse me. The people that had the Japanese living downstairs, the little two brothers, brother and sister that were in that home, they were playing, I started to say,
Yeah,
dog fight, with that, and they were shooting at each other and so forth. And one of the things that they sing is that, "Oh, Mr. Sam, Sam, my dearest Uncle Sam, won't you please come back to Guam?" They were singing that and doing the playing. They were taken to prison. They were taken to prison. They were 17 or 18, 16 or 17. They're already grown. They were taken to prison, and the girl was released because she was a girl, fortunately. She was released, but the older brother, stayed in prison until the day that the Americans recaptured Guam, or started to recapture Guam. And when the Americans were coming down, parachuting and coming down a hill, a mountain, a hill, but we call them mountains, the Japanese beheaded. There were 6 people that they were beheaded, and we saw this in a movie. It was just by chance. I saw it in the movie, and my aunt was also there, and it's her daughter and son that she saw. It was the son was
Beheaded.
was beheaded, yeah, and his head was right by his neck, so you couldn't miss. You could see that it was himself, and that was the shockingest thing that I'd ever seen. I found out. I was describing this to one of my son's girlfriends, and I said to my son, you know, I tried to find that movie, and I never heard it or saw it again. And my son is a whiz on
He's a
the
computer whiz.
computer. He's a computer whiz. And he left the room, so while I was talking, he left the room and he came back and he said, Mom, I just found the clip that you were talking about, but I'm telling you, I don't think you want to see it. And that's, because we could see that was my cousin who was lying there. It was really, really bad. And they had kept them until the Americans came back. And when the Americans were landing was when they decapitated these 6 people. It was horrid. Nothing like it I'd ever seen.
During the marches, you did see people pass away though, as you were marching across.
Say again?
As you were marching across the island,
Mhm.
you did see people die
Oh, gosh,
during
yes.
the marches.
Yes.
I don't think you explained that
Yes.
part to us very much. So she was talking about the marches in the Philippines, right? Remember she mentioned that?
Right.
And it
And-
happened on Guam
And it
as
happened
well.
in Guam also. Gosh, it's hard to we went, the whole island was, what do you want to say? The whole thing, everybody had to move. This
Mobilized? I
town
don't know.
went to that town
Yeah.
and that town, and it's a motion. Everybody was moving, The Japanese, part of what they did was they killed a lot of people, not intentionally killing them and so forth, but in the marches, the little children couldn't catch up. The little old grandmothers would die, and so they would, have a lot of people die on the way. And the Back to Bataan movie shows that very clearly in the Philippines, and that was a true thing in the Philippines too.
So what happened during the marches, if someone, an older person or a child died, then what happened to the body? What happened to the person who died?
They don't get buried. When people die along the way, they just were left, and after the march ends for the day and things are settled, kind of, they sent troops to take care of the dead and bury them in just bury them together.
Yeah.
However many were found.
Mass graves. Let's say so. Mass graves.
Yes, in mass graves.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, there's a question over here.
Mhm.
Okay, so kind of switching away from this topic, but like, when things are bad, like during the war and then after the war, what did like the people of Guam do to like improve life there? Like, what did they do to make it better? 'Cause things were
During
so
and
bad.
after?
Yeah.
Okay, so during the war, during the occupation, and after the occupation, when things were bad, what did the Chamorro people do to either improve their life or improve maybe their outlook on life? What did the Chamorro do to maintain their, I don't know.
For one thing, I told you that or maybe I didn't tell you, that the Chamorro people were Catholic. That's a different story. When the Japanese, or when the Spaniards first came, they either baptized people or they killed them, okay? So the Japanese are not too far off of the Spaniards, I
The
guess.
colonizing
But, yeah,
Spaniards.
right.
That's what we'll name them.
So those who, I lost the train of thought here.
You were gonna talk about what the people did to either make life better or maybe feel better about
Oh.
life. If you couldn't
we're
make it.
we're a very close-knit society, being that we had Spanish background and so forth. We're very close, so people helped each other. We always we helped each other. And by the way, being Catholic, there are lots of people, right? My father had 7 kids, 7 siblings, and my mother had the same, and so forth. So they'll pool their resources, and that continued throughout, and even today, when one of my uncles would raise pigs, and another one has cows, and another one has beans, and so forth, and they all would, contribute to the family. The family on Guam, family is not my children and my grandchildren. Family is my great-grandfather and all the line down. We're still, thank goodness, we are still pretty close that way, at least in my own families, and most of the people actually are that way.
That's your microphone.
What was it like the day that Allie was captured by America?
What was Liberation Day like? They celebrate it every
Oh,
year, by the
my
way. It's a
gosh.
big celebration.
Yeah, Liberation Day. Liberation Day is 1 month. It's celebrated for 1 month because it's the biggest thing that happened to the island, is that we were liberated from the Japanese. Yeah, it's.
Do you remember, I know you were only 7, but do you remember anything from that actual day, the first one?
I did. I do. We had different camps and concentration camps, we call them. And from the concentration camps, we heard that the Americans were arriving, and that the Japanese were pulling out. So we started. We're in this valley, really. Way down, we call it, as I said, mountains. They're just hills, but we heard that the Americans were coming, so we all would all kind of congregate right at the base of this mountain to see the Americans come in, and they did, and those parachutes, just watch the parachute coming down and so forth. It was absolutely, we knew we were saved. And we appreciate it very, very, very much. There are some people now, there are some young people who do not quite appreciate the Americans as much as I think they ought to, but it's because they think the Americans are now the colonizers.
Hmm.
And the reason is because Guam is a small island, and the military, any of you in Air Force people,
Like military
Force.
families?
families, the
Mhm.
military, the biggest base on the island is the Air Force base, and it is supposedly almost as large as the Omaha base. I've no idea. I've just heard that, but to have a base, there has to be land, right? So they confiscated land, and that's okay. And
It's okay with you.
that's okay with me, and that's okay with a lot of people, a lot of land. But the Air Force have their base, and the Navy has its base, and the Army did too, not anymore, and so forth. So, you know, on a little tiny island where everybody lives, it's kind of rough. So the young people that did not suffer through the war have no idea what they're talking about when they say, you know, the U.S. is horrible. They've got us under their feet and that kind of stuff. But really, most people are very, what's the term?
Pro?
Hmm?
Pro? Like pro-US?
For U.S., yeah. Well,
Although-
thankful for the U.S.
Yes. Although on Guam, like in the Philippines, or not the Philippines, wow, we were talking about the Philippines, Puerto Rico, there are people who, I mean, there are some people that would like Guam to be a state. I mean, Puerto Rico, right? There are people that would like it to be a state. There are others that would like it to just be independent and to be independent of the United States. It would be difficult, I think. It would be financially difficult to be independent of the United States. Guam benefits a great deal as a territory of the United States. But also, very interestingly, if you would go to Guam today, you would see that much of the development, all of the big hotels and almost all of the businesses, it seems like, actually are owned by the Japanese. The
Yeah.
Japanese have a huge presence on Guam, and Guam is like Japanese honeymoon location.
Yes.
You know, the Japanese
No,
come and
they seriously come.
yeah,
for-
they really do. They come to Guam to honeymoon
To get
because it's a
married.
paradise. It's a beautiful
Mhm.
place. But
Because it's also, it's a part of the U.S., so they want to be in the U.S., so they come to Guam.
but it's closer. Yeah, but it struck me, once I was old enough to realize, it struck me as interesting that so much was owned by the Japanese today, and that's all good, you know, it's a positive relationship, but after that experience of the Japanese occupation.
Mhm.
But when I was, 6 and 7, didn't occur to me. Okay, other questions? Yeah.
How did you end up coming to the U.S.?
How did you come to the U.S.?
Oh.
Stateside.
My parents, I think I told you my parents were teachers before the war, and so education was really top in their mind, and they made it possible so that each one, there are 9 of us in my family, each one of us could come to the United States and study in the United States if we wanted to. So they made that provision for each one of us because it was so important for them. My father just gets all choked up when he talks about defending the flag that day that the Japanese bombed the island, and how he and his and his other mates had to defend the capital, and that some of them died. He was fortunate, but there's some of his friends died protecting the island.
My grandfather, my tata, was the most patriotic person I've ever known. And he did become a citizen before 1950.
Yes.
So Mom said that's when the act was passed and all Chamorros on Guam were able to become citizens.
My father came to the U.S. to study also after the war. So when he came to the U.S., he became a citizen. We were still on the island and we weren't citizens, but he was in Washington State, and he applied for citizenship, and he got it.
And he had just fought for the country too. My mom also did receive a scholarship, and so she went to the University of Wisconsin at Madison.
Wonderful place.
And that's where she met my daddy. So, and then my dad got a job at UNI. He was the first black professor hired at UNI. Actually, my father was from Jamaica. And so my parents met in Wisconsin, they married, and then moved to Iowa. So that's how we're here in Iowa today.
Yeah.
Okay, any other questions? Yeah, and where? Over here.
I was just gonna
Yeah.
ask
Oh,
you.
I'm sorry.
No, you're good. I'm right behind you. Did you have any other family? Is your family primarily still in Guam? Have any of them come stateside? Do you travel back and forth?
Oh, yes. Almost all of my father's family have children that came to the U.S. to study. The biggest thing is that after the war, the people of Guam, the men, went into the service, the American service. A lot of them went into the Navy, and they retired, long ago now, and so forth. So all the military, the Air Force, the Army, the Navy, they all.
We have
yeah.
Marines. Uncle John's
Right,
a Marine.
Uncle Marine, yeah. And a lot of them fought in the Korean War and in the Vietnamese War, and so a lot of people died in both those wars.
Actually, two things. Today, Guam has one of the highest per capita enrollment rates. That's not what you call it, but in the military, the people of Guam serve in the U.S. Armed Forces. It is so common. So most of our relatives that are stateside, they live in cities near bases. They, like my mom's generation, they're retired military, but then their children are military also. So we have relatives that are stateside, not in Iowa. We don't have any military bases,
All over.
but all over where there are military bases. But the question about education was a good one. In both my father's family from Jamaica and my mother's family from Guam, because we were here in Iowa, we were in Cedar Falls, because we were at UNI. I had aunts and uncles from both sides that came and stayed with us some of the time, and then a lot of times just were near us. So I have aunts and uncles that graduated from UNI and from Iowa, and they were from, Guam and Jamaica. How does someone from Guam or Jamaica end up there? Because you have family in Iowa. Yeah. Any other questions?
The island of Guam is beautiful. It's small, but it's really, really beautiful. If you ever get a chance to go and visit, please do. It's a wonderful place. American currency, American stamps, et cetera, et cetera.
Oh, yeah, when we went to Guam, my husband and I, you know, we purchased stuff, right? And so instead of bringing it home, we sent it home. And we went to the WW2 post office, and the guy there was so great. But it was very cheap for us to send it home because it was US. And we were there with someone, you know, someone else was there, and they were sending stuff to the Philippines much closer than sending it to Iowa. But it was so cheap for us because it was US. And I remember that person, like, they were paying a lot of money to send stuff to the Philippines. Was there a question over here?
One thing I kind of wanted to ask was, do you miss Guam?
Do you miss Guam?
Oh, gosh. I'm going there. I've been waiting for this stupid pandemic so that I can go. I was supposed to go 2 years ago. I used to go every year practically. I'm on my way.
She misses it. I miss it too.
I'm on my way.
Yeah, we were supposed to have a family reunion, and then the pandemic hit, so that was canceled.
Family is most important on Guam. And as I say, family doesn't mean my children and I. Family means my parents,
Extended family.
yeah.
Was there another question here? Question? No. McKenna.
So you went to the University of Wisconsin, right? What did you major in?
What did you major in at UW?
Spanish.
And the
She
reason
copied me.
I did. I completely did. She also loved purple before I did. Okay, so I
Absolutely.
copied her in all things. But the reason that she studied Spanish, I love this story. Your great-grandfather, right? Her great-grandfather spoke Spanish because, you know, the Spaniards were on Guam. And so they spoke Spanish in school. And Mom was at some party or something, and there was a young woman that nobody could communicate with, except her great-grandfather could communicate with her in Spanish. And so my mom declared a major in Spanish, having never studied 1 minute of it in junior high or high school, like you all did, right? And so she went to the University of Wisconsin to major in Spanish, and she had never studied it. Now, the Chamorro language, there are some Spanish loan words, mostly for things that maybe the concept didn't exist. When the Spaniards, I used to say discovered in quotation marks, if you were in my classroom, just gonna call it what it is, colonized Guam, right? When they colonized Guam, if it was something that the Chamorros didn't already have, then when they brought it, they brought the word. But the words also were extended to things that did exist. And part of that, you know, some people want Guam to be independent, but whether they want that or not, I think a lot of people just want to bring back the Chamorro terms and the Chamorro ways. So even the spelling, like the spelling of the word Chamorro was spelled in a Spanish way. And now the Chamorro people don't want to spell it that way. They want to spell it their own way. It's just that the Spaniards made the first dictionaries. So language is so much, you know, it's what you already know. So it's the sounds you already hear and recognize. And you just take what you hear and apply, or take what you hear people saying and apply what you know. And so the words came out a certain way, and that's not necessarily the true way. So if you look up the capital of Guam, you might see Agana, but if you look at a more recent publication, you'll see Hagatna, which is the Chamorro spelling of what the Spaniards called Agana. So, okay, Mom, you lasted the whole period.
Awesome.
I mean, this isn't just a period, this is a block.
You
I
did
remember the
great.
first time
Thank
I
you
taught
so
on the
much.
block.
Sorry,
No, it was good.
no.
She did a good job, right? You did great, Mom.
Sorry, I didn't mean to monopolize your time. I wondered when that,
Well, some people had to go. They had an appointment or something.
Yes, there were a couple people that had appointments, but.
We
no-
planned for it to be
Yep.
the whole period if it went that long. So it was perfect. It was good.
okay.
Well, thank you for having us.
Yes, thank
Yes,
you so
thank
much for
you.
coming. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
I will just dismiss you all from in here since we are close to getting out, so you can socialize or chat for a minute. Thank you.
And if you want to come talk to my mom, you can.